sharpen your pencils and break out your calculators. Today, we're combining chess and math. We need to figure out when a piece is being attacked and it's also being defended, whether or not it's actually in danger. Take a look at our chessboard here. Both sides clearly have watched my video on how to develop their pieces, but it's this knight I want to focus on. How many different black pieces do you see that can capture this knight? Well, I counted 2. I counted the queen and the bishop. And this is one of those chess videos where you've really got to be exact. There's no points in chess for being close to the right answer. Just like in class, if your teacher says, "What's 2 times 2?" and you say 5, she's not going to say close, okay? You've got to be exact to get the numbers right today. So there's 2 attackers on the knight. How many white pieces are aiming at or defending, or what we might say guarding the knight? Well, I only see 1, which is the queen. So if there are 2 attackers and there's only 1 defender, 2 against 1 is clearly not good for the white team. So here's the rule in chess. If there are more attackers than defenders, you should usually make a capture. Just like in our hanging pieces video, there was 1 attacker and 0 defenders. 1 is clearly more than 0. This is just a little bit higher level concept than the previous video. So if I were black in this position, I would clearly reach out and capture this knight with 1 of my pieces. Let's say, however, black for some reason doesn't realize that. Maybe black is so concerned on castling he does that. It's now white's turn. If you realize your knight's in danger, of course you could move it away. But let's pretend you love having that knight in the center, which you should. How can we even up the score? How can we make it 2 against 2? I need another defender of the knight. Why don't you pause your videos and figure out how many different ways you see white can defend this knight. Okay, well if you're back, you probably found a lot. I see that this pawn can move to the square c3. That's one way to defend the knight. Now, it's 2 attackers, the same 2 as before, but there are 2 defenders. If the score is tied, 2-2, then the defending side is okay. So once again, I'm going to repeat. If there are more attackers than defenders, the attacking side should usually capture. But if the score is tied, 2-2, then the defending side is okay. I don't have a problem with black capturing once. The bishop could take the knight. But when we take back, black clearly should not capture a second time, because if he does that, that's going to cost him his queen. When you paused your videos, I asked you to find all the different ways to defend the knight. This was simply one way. But bishop to e3 would be a great second way. That actually gets a new piece off the back row. And a third way would be to bring this knight around to the square e2. This knight looks perfectly safe to me. Notice I don't like this move as much. I know we're defending this knight, but it's the other knight I'm worried about. Take a look at the knight on f5. How many attackers does black have on the knight? I count 1, 2, 3. Hopefully you got the same answer. But I only count 2 defenders, 1, 2. If it's 3 against 2, that knight is in deep trouble. Now what I'd like to do is show you a much more complicated example that actually came from a real chess game. Wow, the board just got a lot more complicated. In this game, black wants to play this move, pawn to g4. But before playing it, he must do a very careful count of attackers and defenders. I want you to picture this black pawn landing on the square g4. Count the attackers and the defenders. Come back to me when you've got an accurate account of both. Okay, let's count the attackers first. I count 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sure you got all of those. But you know what? When this pawn captures back, that opens up the bishop. So we actually have to count the bishop as an attacker. That's 5. And when the bishop captures one day, then the queen will be there for backup all the way through. So surprisingly, the answer is 6. Now let's count the defenders. Let's get rid of all of our arrows there. the number of defenders. 1, 2, 3, 4, and when the bishop captures, that will open up the queen. 5. Uh-oh, it's 6 to 5. Black realized this, and before advancing his pawn, he slid his bishop back to f8. That opens up the rook to help out. When the pawn advances, the rook will become the 6th defender. Now white couldn't find a way to stop the pawn, so he decides to run away with his king. Black, in fact, did move the pawn, and here we go. Lots of captures coming up. White took, black took, white took, black took, white took, black took. I'm a broken record. White took, black, white, black, white, and black. After all of that, black came out okay. In fact, black went on to win this game because his rook broke through against this pawn, and then the other pawn came down the board and made a promotion. Awesome counting by black. Whoa. We've got one more idea I'd like to talk about today. Back to the starting position so I can show you. When you're figuring out attackers and defenders, you also need to figure out who's getting better pieces. The pieces have point values. It's kind of like a price tag, but you don't get to see the price tag. You just have to remember how much each piece costs. In chess, we say that the pawn is worth about 1 point. If you want to think of it like money, think of it like $1. The bishop and the knight are each worth $3. I know they move differently, but hey, M&Ms taste a lot different than Skittles, and they usually cost the same. So bishops and knights, they move differently, but they're both worth about 3 points. The rook is worth about 5. The queen is worth about 9. And we actually don't put a price tag on the king because you can't capture the king. And of course, when you give checkmate, the game ends. Now, points don't win games. Points just help you decide whether or not to make a trade. I'm sure you knew, without me giving you the points, that it's a really good idea if you could trade a pawn or a knight for a queen. That's just obvious. And you don't want to give away your queen for a rook because the queen is clearly more powerful. But let's test you out here. I'm going to give you some pretend examples, and you're going to tell me if it's a good trade. Would you trade 2 pawns for a bishop? I would, because 2 pawns is 1 plus 1, which is 2, and the bishop is worth 3. How about this? Would you trade a knight and a bishop for a rook? Nope, I wouldn't either. Knight and bishop is 3 plus 3, which is 6, and the rook is only worth 5. How about this? Would you trade a queen and a pawn for 2 rooks? Well, that one's kind of tricky. A queen and a pawn is 9 plus 1, which is 10. 2 rooks is 5 plus 5, which is 10. Sometimes the queen and pawn would be better. Sometimes the 2 rooks would be better. So remember, points just help you decide whether or not a trade is usually good, but it's always going to depend on the position. Have I seen positions where a bishop is better than a rook? You bet I have. But most of the time, the rook is still going to be better than the bishop, and so forth. Okay, remember to count attackers and defenders. Remember, if there's more attackers than defenders, you should probably capture. And remember also that you should be counting up the points of the pieces to decide whether or not a trade is good for you or good for the other guy.